welcome to Music Theory Lesson 3 here on the Internet Music Academy, the free comprehensive online resource where anyone can learn how music works. In Lesson 2, we learned about musical intervals or the distance between different notes. If you haven't completed Lesson 2 yet, I would recommend you start there. In Lesson 3, I will introduce you to music notation, or written music. Being able to read music will ensure that you have access to all the music that the world has to offer. In addition, being able to write music is an important skill as well because, as with language, it assures that if you have a good idea, you can write it down and other people are able to understand it. Let's begin. This is called a staff. It is made up of 5 lines that hold and organize our musical notes. In between the 5 lines are what we call spaces. A note can be placed on top of a line or in one of these spaces, and each line or space holds one pitch. Each movement up one line or space increases the pitch by one note of the C scale. Each movement down a line or space decreases the pitch by one note of the same scale. When on the staff, notes are read like a book, from left to right, to be played or sung at specific times. Therefore, a musical staff can be seen like a graph of sorts, which plots frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. At the beginning of any staff, you will see a symbol called a clef. There are 3 primary clefs: treble, bass, and alto/tenor clef, which use the same symbol, but the placement of that symbol determines if it's actually alto or tenor clef. Each of these symbols is a modernized version of old Gothic letters for G, F, and C. Hence, treble, bass, and alto/tenor clef are sometimes referred to by those letters. The clef placed at the beginning of the staff determines for the reader what lines and spaces correlate to what pitches. Treble clef is typically used by instruments or singers with higher frequencies because the notes represented on a treble staff are all above middle C, approximately in the upper half of our hearing range. Middle C is a commonly referenced landmark on the piano because of the prevalence of C-based music and its approximation to the center of the keyboard. Middle C is C4, or the 4th C up from the bottom of the piano, and it vibrates at about 261.6 Hz. Bass clef, on the other hand, is used by instruments or singers with lower frequencies because the notes represented on the bass staff are all approximately in the lower half of our hearing range. Tenor and alto clef, the C clefs, operate in between treble and bass clef, with middle C falling inside of the staff's lines. In treble clef, there are a few easy ways to remember what pitches are where. The first way is that the curly part of the middle of the treble clef circles the line that holds G, which is also our other name for treble clef, G clef. An easy way to remember the names of the spaces in treble clef is by the acronym FACE, face. From bottom to top, the spaces in treble clef spell the word face. Also, since face and space rhyme, hopefully you will be able to remember that the face is in the space. You might have also heard the phrase, "every good boy deserves fudge," or some sort of variation of that. This is also an acceptable way to remember the lines of the treble staff, E, G, B, D, F, every good boy deserves fudge, from bottom to top. But I wouldn't recommend it as highly as face, since it's more cumbersome and a little bit more forgettable than simply remembering space and face since they rhyme. In bass clef, there is a similarly easy way to remember the spaces. The acronym ACE, or ACE, plus the letter G. From bottom to top, ACE G, ACE-G. Since ACE also rhymes with space, it works well with our treble clef way of remembering the names of the spaces. In addition to that, the 2 dots of the bass clef are on either side of the line that holds the note F. And since the bass clef is also known as the F clef, this is a helpful way to remember that. Now, if you have ever seen piano music before, you might have noticed that it is actually 10 lines, not 5, but with a larger space in the middle. These 10 lines together form the grand staff. The top 5 lines make up the treble staff, and the bottom 5 lines are the bass staff. The reason the piano and other large keyboard instruments use both staves simultaneously is because the instrument encompasses such a large range, and because so many notes can be produced at the same time that it would get quite crowded and difficult to read on just one single staff. Most other instruments, such as winds, strings, and brass instruments, just use one staff because it is typical to only be producing one note at a time, or in the case of string instruments, as many as 3 or 4. If necessary, these instruments can change between clefs at different times in the music, but are rarely written on a grand staff. The thing that distinguishes a grand staff from 2 separate lines of music, one being in treble and one being in bass, is that the 2 staves are connected on the left side by a vertical line, and next to that by a brace. Alto clef, one variation of the C clef, is the least commonly used among the clefs. In alto clef, the symbol is placed so that it symmetrically encompasses the middle line of the staff, which is middle C. This is why alto clef is one of the C clefs, because it shows us where middle C is at. However, unless you are learning to play viola, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to need to use alto clef in any practical application. Tenor clef, which also uses the C clef, is simply moved up one line from where it appeared in alto clef. The middle of the clef still shows us where middle C is, now on the 4th line up from the bottom of the staff. The C clef is the only clef that is commonly moved in this way to fit different ranges of notes within the lines of the staff. Historically, all of the clefs were movable in this way, and over time have settled into the standardized positions that we see today. Tenor clef is used by people who play bassoon, cello, euphonium, double bass, and trombone when they need to play notes in their higher registers. However, many modern composers today will write these higher notes in treble clef rather than tenor clef in an ongoing shift away from using the C clef at all. There is also something called the neutral or percussion clef, which can resemble either 2 vertical lines or a vertical rectangle. This staff is typically used to notate percussion instruments that do not have standardized frequencies, such as snare drums, bass drums, and cymbals. Rather, a key or legend will tell the performer at the beginning of each piece which line or space correlates to which drum or cymbal. There are some common layouts used by standardized ensembles such as marching bands, but overall, there are no strict rules, just guidelines, that dictate how this clef is to be used. It is also common to see single instruments such as a bass drum or triangle notated on a staff with just one line as opposed to the traditional 5. For the last topic of this video, let's talk about something called ledger lines. Sometimes the frequency of a pitch will be more or less than the pitches that can be notated by either the treble or bass clef. In such cases, we add small temporary lines above or below the staff called ledger lines to show where the note is at. The same rule applies that moving by one line or space moves one note within the scale. This is simply an easy way to increase and decrease the range of a staff without having to change clefs. For example, in treble clef, the bottom line of the staff is E. The note right below the staff is D, and if we continue down to the first ledger line, we come to middle C. To recap Lesson 3, we learned that a staff is a series of 5 lines and 4 spaces that hold and organize our musical notes. Clefs then determine which lines and spaces are associated with which pitches. Our 3 main clefs are treble, bass, and alto or tenor clef, although we also have the neutral clef, which is used for percussion instruments. And ledger lines are used to extend the range of a staff without having to change clefs. In Lesson 4, we will continue our discussion on writing music by starting to put some real notes on our grand staff. If you would like to test your knowledge of this lesson, check the description for a link to the quiz. If you find this course to be helpful, be sure to like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any new content. If what you learned here today has made you a better musician, Please also consider becoming a patron of the Internet Music Academy for as little as $1 a month on our Patreon page. Link also in the description. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.